we can never know what structure is causing low back pain unless it's like more of an acute. If it's 2 weeks and you bent over and it's boom, it's right there. 2 weeks, yeah, I'm buying it. Like we can pinpoint a structure. If it's been 5 years, there's no way we're saying, hey, that's disc. Hey, there's just no way.
Nick Pippert is a doctor of physical therapy based here in Dallas, Texas. He has an athletic background, having played competitive soccer, and today you'll find him training and competing in marathon runs. Now, I think Nick is the perfect example of a professional who truly practices what he preaches. He's developed his entire lifestyle about staying healthy, and that's both mentally and physically. So in this conversation, Nick and I talk about what anybody can take away from a physical therapy practice and some different tools you can apply to your everyday life for a healthier lifestyle. Anything from training to diet to recovery to mentality and even some of the science in between. So I hope you guys enjoy the conversation, and I hope you take away something valuable from it. If you're encouraged to support the podcast, please visit the Patreon page, which is linked in the description here. Contributing over there is a great way to show me that you like to see this podcast project of mine continue to grow. So with that, my name is Alex Shozda. This is the Shozda Show. Let's begin. Why physical therapy?
So physical therapy for me started in high school. I was an athlete all throughout and played soccer. And when I got to, the high school tier level, that's when I really got serious. Practiced a lot on my own, passing and whatnot. So it was a really big part of my life. And towards the tail end of my career, I was looking at playing in college. Mm-hmm. So we were doing showcase tournaments and all of that in senior year. And during this showcase tournament, I was defending another player, and when I planted and cut, my knee kind of just went out from under me. Oof. And it was kind of like, what just happened? Mm-hmm. I was in kind of a denial period for probably 3 months. It was in the fall, so towards the end of the year, my parents were like, look, our deductible's already met. Let's get an MRI. Let's check it out. Mm-hmm. So of course, the MRI came back. My ACL was torn. And so we went up and did the surgery. All that was fine. No complications. I just had a really good rehab experience. Mm-hmm. I wasn't with, some super fancy, sparkly sports PT. But they just helped me get back to the sport that I loved along with their intern. And I wanted to, in turn, help people do that again on my own.
Did you get back to a point where you're still competing in college?
No. And so that's kind of where life turned. Sometimes, one door opens, another one, or one door closes, another one opens. I realized that due to my stature and just, I wasn't good enough to get to the point that I wanted to with my current skill level. So I completely switched gears. Instead of playing soccer and doing more of like the business route, I chose to dive into the science and go after helping people.
Yeah, it's kind of awesome to hear too how many physical therapists start with their own sports journey and usually involves some kind of injury that they went through the process themselves.
It really is pretty common.
Into a career, yeah.
It really is pretty common. I think if you've never had an injury, you wouldn't really know about PT.
Yeah.
Unless you're a little bit older and you're coming with some aches and pains as you're maybe not moving as much.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on something that I had prepared as a question for way down the road, but since you said it nearly perfectly, we're going to go right into it. There's so many people who say that they almost recommend somebody should get injured so that they have to go see a PT, because in their scenario, it was just a massive learning experience that they've never learned so much about how their body functions and operates. So what do you think is that kind of experience that changes people's mind about PT or makes them so in favor of it?
I think it's the people kind of concept. In healthcare, it's so sterile a lot of the time. It's so, you have this, we're going to prescribe this medication, and this is the course of treatment. I think with PT, it's much more fluid, in that you have sort of a personalized approach. And right, each PT is a little different. They have a different perspective. And it's that sort of customization piece of a healthcare scenario that I think really opens people's eyes to say, I can make this whatever I want. I can really, target my goals, whatever they may be, with the help of this person.
Mm-hmm. And kind of more from an educational standpoint, what do you think are the main takeaways that people have after they've gone through, I guess, what you call their residency?
Yeah, so I think
PT term.
I think people find out that it's not all about tissue. And that's one piece that I really like, is having symptoms. And just so the viewers know, when I say symptoms, what I'm really saying is pain. Mm-hmm. But I do that for a very specific reason. When we talk about pain and pain and pain, we actually increase our fear and increase our symptoms because our brain is triggered to not feel that. So I use a purposefully vague term so that we kind of desensitize the whole idea.
Right. I guess we're going into now a whole realm of what you call pain science, right? So how would you say the difference is between when a patient comes to you? What's the difference between the physical element of their therapy, doing the movements, doing the exercises, strengthening the muscles, the tendons, the nerves, and then the whole mental element about how they think about the therapy process, what they think it's doing for them? What's your whole approach on that? And how do you kind of interlace that with your treatments?
So there's sort of like a contextual change that happens.
Mm-hmm.
People come in with whatever preconceived notion of what PT should be, and we start with the physical aspect because, let's face it, that's why they're there.
Yeah.
They are hurting, or they want to move better, whatever it is. And they come in with a physical problem that also may have more of an underlying contextual problem as well. So when we look at sort of the context of movement, we see that it's not only a physical problem, but it's also, a fear problem. Mm-hmm. So the person has some fear of lifting, wherever they got that idea from. And we show them gradedly, like, look, you can do the movement, you can do the squat without discomfort. Mm-hmm. But you've got to be able to squat and pick up your laundry basket, right?
Absolutely.
So we kind of walk back and piecemeal the movement together so that the person sees, wow, this lifting idea that I thought was like really damaging to me is really not as scary as I thought it was supposed to be.
Right. And then you also give them something tangible that they can tie it to an everyday function, just like the example you mentioned, squatting, picking up your laundry, or the famous putting your luggage in the overhead on an airplane.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I think it really is fear, and people need someone to listen to them and hear their story. And that's that conversational, that customization piece. No PT route is that a patient takes is ever going to be the same. And I think that's the real beauty, going back to what we were talking about earlier, of why people see kind of this eye-opening experience when they first step into a PT clinic.
Mm-hmm. Would you say a PT is a lot like a detective?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because that's kind of the way I see it, is that you have this case to solve, right? Somebody might be telling you what happened, although they may or may not be super familiar with their own body. So they may or may not have an exact representation or even idea of what's going on. And then at that point, it's your job to do the full investigation, figure out what's wrong, and then build a solution, right? So I guess if you're applying that approach, and you have so many different scenarios, and it just changes by the person that comes in, do you have some kind of foundation that you follow in order to make it effective, or is it really just playing by ear and you're so well trained that you can do it on the fly?
So there obviously is lots of different knowledge bases that we draw from, tissues, different regions obviously have different things that can, one, are just local, right? If you're having some shoulder discomfort, we want to look at all the shoulder potential generating structures, symptom generating structures there. But there are also other things that can go to that region, like organs. So the first thing that we do in our exam is make sure that the patient is there for a PT fixable type disorder, right? So if they have a fracture and it's not stable, that's not something that we necessarily treat. We can treat somebody after the fact for the loss of range of motion, the discomfort, the loss of strength. But if they have a fracture, they need to go get an image to see how bad it is and potentially take some more steps to see if they need to get it casted or, get it booted or, whatever it is to make sure that it's not going to cause more hurt than improvements. So after that, this is what you're kind of touching on, this hypothetical model of how we deduce what's going on with them. Obviously, whatever region they're coming in with, we used the shoulder earlier, so we'll stick with that. The shoulder has lots of different muscles, lots of different ligaments, lots of different structures that are there. And we have different questions to narrow down what might be the cause. And if that exam at the end, we don't really get at what we're looking for, we kind of widen the scope. Because, like I said earlier, things can refer to the shoulder. That might be where the source of your discomfort is, but might not necessarily be that structure in the shoulder is causing them. So by widen the scope, I mean maybe your neck is what's causing the symptoms to go down into your shoulder.
So it's kind of like a yin and yang between different kind of antagonists and protagonists within the muscle groups or even the nerve groups. Could have a knot in one area completely unrelated, or I guess not unrelated, but completely detached from the point where you're experiencing your pain. And because you're pulling that tension from somebody else, somewhere else, it's creating the sensation in a different part of your body, right?
Yeah. And it almost is like a trial and error bit. We have all these questions, we have all these tests, we come to a hypothesis, and then we have to test it out. We do a trial treatment. 2 to 3 things. Okay, it's muscular. Muscles like to be loaded. So let's load them. And then through our objective exam, we'll usually find one or more things that the patient has their symptom, the reason they're coming to us during that movement. So we test it out. We trial a treatment. Does that improve your symptoms? Does it improve your range of motion? And if it doesn't, then we move on to the next hypothesis.
Right. Do you usually find what you're expecting to find? Or is it pretty common to just be completely surprised once you start doing these tests?
It's very variable. A lot of times you'll be spot on and, they're textbook. They just fit the rule. But more so that I'm finding, especially with the state of Dallas, I think there is some regional differences. And I can touch on that a little bit if you would like.
Dive into it, yeah.
So in this location, people are high achievers. They are lawyers, business people, high stress jobs, right?
Yeah.
That's our high achievers. So their baseline stress levels are just higher. And that complicates things. It muddies the water a little bit because now we have another kind of level to consider Whereas in a more potentially rural environment where people are doing more manual work, they are just overusing their tissues because that's how they put their food on the table for their kids. Things maybe aren't as muddy because it's just tissue. And we've got to figure out a way to sell, look, I know that you're hurting, but exercise is going to improve why the root cause of your issue.
Yeah.
So I've seen that in Garden City, Kansas, kind of a rural environment. It's just a different kind of patient scenario.
Yeah, so how does that look
go.
like in Dallas?
What do you mean?
So how does it look like when your patient comes in and you can, I guess, get the sensation that all of the stress they're under is contributing a lot to whatever ailment they have in their body?
So there are different triggers, like things that trigger me to say, okay, this is more of a pain science case.
Okay.
They don't sleep well. Their career choice. Some people like
career's the worst. I guess the highest stress in your experience.
I would say lawyers.
All right.
Lawyers
they just come in really tight.
They just have an education to the point where they know that they can just, it's sort of like they can fix everything if they just do their job really well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we sometimes see it with business folks, like CEOs too. But I would say people who have like a lot of responsibility, but also are like they're the type of person that if it's not done right, they're just like, I'm going to go do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things, like lots of responsibility and like maybe a problem delegating. So I see that a lot with lawyers. I see that a lot with CEOs or like execs.
Right. So you're saying that it gets more into a pain science approach and more of a nervous system. You were naming off some common symptoms you see, like their career, their sleep. What else do you commonly see going on with these folks?
These folks, maybe they don't have as much time to exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they just haven't gotten the right diet for them. So there's lots of lifestyle factors that we can influence when they have a pain science case. Another thing that kind of cues me in is if they say, I had a patient recently, like he had a big project coming up. Mm-hmm. And he had to present to this board of, whatever execs in his field, and they were going to give him a grade on it. And he wanted to get a really solid mark. Mm-hmm. Well, his symptoms were worse because, one, you're not taking care of your body quite as well. But two, you've got this really intense stressor going on. So that's another thing that triggers, okay, we need to have this conversation. And it's difficult to be a little tactful, right? Mm-hmm. You can't really start this conversation day one. They don't know me. We need a little more information before we start saying, hey, you're stressed out. Let's start addressing that.
Yeah.
Especially I find with men, they don't take the conversation as well. They're like, oh, I'm fine. Mm-hmm. I'll get through it. So I think there's a little bit of tact that needs to go into the conversation. And ultimately, the person needs to be receptive to that conversation. So obviously, if I come off the street and I say, Alex, hey, you're stressed out, man. You need to work on that. You're going to be like, what the heck? No, yeah. I'm absolutely, you don't even know me. So there is a little bit of, we're getting some of this information in the initial evaluation, but we start small. We start with the movement. We start with, hey, this tissue's a little irritated. But what we see with these chronic pain patients is that they don't have a textbook presentation. Even if the rotator cuff on 2 patients is irritated, they don't present the same way. Mm-hmm. And maybe one has more than one problem region. Maybe we can go to low back because that's a much better example. Okay. We can never know what structure is causing low back pain unless it's like more of an acute If it's 2 weeks and you bent over and it's boom, it's right there. 2 weeks, yeah, I'm buying it. Like we can pinpoint a structure. If it's been 5 years, there's no way we're saying, hey, that's disc. Hey, there's just no way. So these people may have their whole back is like, yep, it's all of it. There's no way that one structure is causing the whole back to be generating symptoms.
So it's like a tangled up fishing line of different problems, and then you have to slowly, piece by piece, start to dissect it. So what are the common areas in the body, just from an anatomy standpoint, that cause stress in the lower back? Or I guess the most common ones, at least. So a lot of people will be really quick to jump to something like, oh, your hip flexors are really tight, or your psoas is really tight, so you need to do XYZ stretch, and once you loosen it up, then you're going to be fine. Although stretching a muscle is completely different from strengthening and mobilizing a supportal muscle versus something like a nerve pain or some sort of alignment or even just posture that changes the load you're bearing throughout the day. So since there's so many things going on, what are the first things that you look at and kind of check the box if they exist or play process of elimination with?
So we're getting at sort of like, what are the deficits that people usually have?
That's a great way to put it. Let me rephrase it. What are the deficits that people have that cause back pain?
And unfortunately, there's no like checkbox kind of thing that is like, okay, you have tight hip flexors, you have, so boiling it down to, some sort of everybody has this, I think is really difficult. It's such an individualized approach. That's why you need a one-on-one. Like when we have so much information that we can boil data down and put it in a database and a computer can do this, I just don't think it's going to happen. I just don't think we can say, based on how you plug in information into a database and it spits out an output of this is the stuff you need to work on. I don't know. I just don't think that we'll get there.
Yeah, it's just not so binary.
No, I don't think it is.
So then what are the senses that come into play that set you apart from, let's say, an algorithm that tries to do that?
Well, I think when we boil down deficits, like, why is it tight? Why is your hip flexor tight? Is it tight because of your posture? Is it tight because it's weak and it's literally holding on for dear life just to give you that stability from the front part of your hip? I just don't think that a simple deficit that somebody says, you know what, I have this sensation, that a computer is going to be like, oh, I know that it's because X. Yeah. We have to do some objective testing to kind of correlate what's being said as well.
So kind of let's branch to the other side of PT, because we've been talking a lot about treating symptoms post-rehabilitation. How much work do you do on the prehab side of things, kind of helping, let's say, athletes or very high-performance athletes prevent injuries? So how important is that?
I'm getting more into the prehab side. We have basically who it is. It's moms who have come in for whatever they're dealing with, whatever they're experiencing, had a really good experience and said, holy crap, my son, he's getting into the gym. Like, I just want him to have a good experience and not get hurt. So can you take him through, like, show him some stuff?
Yeah.
And that's usually the conversation I get. And that just, it's so great. I love that. So what I'm doing is using my background as a personal trainer to teach them how to generate these movement patterns that their high school coaches are going to have them start to load highly and quickly.
Right. So you're teaching them like the fundamentals of your deadlift, your bench press, your squat, just all these core compound movements that you're going to see in any kind of athletic program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you hip hinge? What's your squat look like? And the great thing is, when I see him as a freshman or maybe even as a senior, like, they haven't lifted enough to create these, I want to say, problem areas like that I notice. Like, I have specific parts of my body that are stiff, like my ankles and my hips. And these it's just good to kind of input some wisdom to be like, hey, this is what your squat should look like. If you find that it's getting to the point where it's getting less and less looking like this, we need to kind of open up that discussion of why. Maybe you need to go see a PT. Maybe you need to talk to your trainer, whoever it may be, but address it so that you don't end up with discomfort and then ultimately out of your sport at some point.
Yeah. So do you do a lot of work with athletes specific to the sport that they're doing? So like, for example, if you had a swimmer come in, would you get the idea that, oh, swimmers are doing a lot of shoulder movements? It's very common for them to get imbalances in their shoulders that lead to injuries. So you kind of help them out early on before they develop any of those symptoms with, hey, you can do this kind of external rotation with your shoulder. I'm not going to explain the technicals to you, but it's going to help you prevent injuries down the road. So do you do a lot of that with your younger athletes too?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's some basics that everybody needs to have, which we were talking about, the core movements, but specifically moving more in like when a patient comes into me and you're a young athlete and they have already specialized. So in the previous case, they're more of a general, like they just are doing lots of different things, which I think is a good idea, even, well into high school and collegiate. These people are like, I do lacrosse, I do football, and that helps me as a practitioner say, what is it that I need to help you do? And even boiling it down further of, obviously the demands of a linebacker are different than that of a quarterback. So boiling down the movements even more, in your case with the swimmers, we're going to address as specific as we can, because that's what's going to give them the best results. If we give them just a general, here's our shoulder exercises, they're probably not going to have as good of results if we say, okay, let me see how, like, literally take a video in the pool and show me what it looks like when you're doing this.
So I want to ask you a question about something you touched on just prior. You said it's really, really good when you see athletes playing multiple different sports. Why? What about it?
So we see this a lot with our young athletes, and it's little bit of a balance, but I think when you specialize too early, you focus a little bit too much on how do I really nail down, and they just kind of overwork their bodies, especially if they're not developed yet. The young athlete is different than someone like you or I who, we're done growing. So our muscles are stronger. We're just in a better time frame to start to refine and really focus on one thing.
Yeah. So do you think that's the case more for a longevity standpoint? It's good to have variety for longevity. Would you make the same argument if, let's say, there's a 12-year-old here and his goal is, I want to be in the Olympic Games for track and field running the 200-meter dash? Would you still think it's the same advice to throw in a lot of variety? Or do you think it's important to specialize earlier?
I think absolutely that it's good to have some variety. Why do we have cross training? Yeah. So it's just one of those things. And obviously, like, when we periodize for our training, if your competition is in a month, you're probably doing less cross training and focusing more on refining your craft and just getting geared up for the competition. So there's kind of an ebb and flow a little bit when we look at what does training look like. Are we, just starting out where we do a little more cross training, or are we, really, trying to be specific right now so that we can have the best times that we can in our 200-meter dash?
So then, outside of other athletes, how would you say that your entire career as a physical therapist changed the way that you train and changed the way that you treat your body? Because let's start from a sport standpoint, since you're running a marathon coming up, and you said you were a climber as well, and then we'll touch into more lifestyle later.
Okay. So starting from soccer, even before that.
All right.
I played soccer from the time I could play soccer, 4 years old. It's like mob ball. You're running around all different spots. And so like I played soccer forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I then in high school added some lifting. And I think that my lifting was very rigid in the fact that I trained the same ranges of motion and just tried to increase my weights.
Mm-hmm.
My education for my athletes when they're lifting is it doesn't matter what the weights are. Unless you're a power lifter and your goal is to lift heavy weights, your weight training is to augment what you're doing on the field, in the pool, on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I went wrong with my lifting. And doing so, I created some, maybe not muscle imbalances, but definitely some stiffness in different areas. So now, as I'm no longer sitting for 8 hours a day and standing, I notice that my back hurts pretty constantly. And my feet hurt pretty constantly. And so I've had to change my methodology, change my training to just look like rehab. It's kind of funny. Like I'm in the clinic and I just stay after work and get a workout in, and it looks mainly like rehab, mixed in with weights, mixed in with cardio. And I've sort of created more of a balanced approach, I'd like to say.
Yeah. So how do you balance it with traditional strength training, or do you still even have a need for that at all?
So I think diet absolutely helps you to create the physique that you want, because most people want to look a certain way.
I guess let's backtrack a little bit for context. What are your goals when it comes to training? What are you training for?
So currently I have 2 goals.
Okay.
I have the longevity aspect.
Mm-hmm.
We know from countless studies that if we're physically active, our brain is healthier, our body is healthier.
All right.
I don't think that can be refuted. So longevity.
100% agree with you.
So that's one goal.
And cheering you on for it.
I want to continue to move and well on into my life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the next thing is just sort of, I want to create this like readiness. We talked about this a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I were dropped in any part of the country, I want to feel like I could, surmount whatever obstacles were in my way, whether it be swimming, climbing, running, moving equipment, whatever it be.
Right. So you just want to be completely versatile in whatever movement or physical based function, or I guess even mental based function that you find yourself in.
Yeah. And right now I'm kind of experimenting. I'm in basically a journeyman of everything.
Yeah. I think we can kind of relate on that.
We're
more so in the past. Nowadays, it's more swim specific, but it ebbs and flows. Anyways, back to your story.
Absolutely. I think it's one of those things where we're kind of just experimenting with a lot of different things. You mentioned my marathon. I am training for that, and I've never done one before. And it's interesting because I did sort of like a couch to, not that I wasn't doing anything, but I wasn't running per se, a mile here, a mile there. I was not doing a long run of 18 miles, which I did yesterday.
Hell yeah.
And it was rough, I gotta say. You're really challenging your body when you push it to the limit like that.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you've learned in your kind of experimentation with training for longevity, and then also now specifying for that marathon race? So like, what have you had to tweak?
So my workouts in the midst of the weeks are no longer just whatever I want to do, just in general programming. It's how do I get healthy enough so that I can run my long run?
Gotcha. So that weekend 18 miles, which progressively gets higher by the week, right? That's the main event. And then everything you're doing within the week is to prepare yourself for it?
Yes.
So then what does that look like?
So right now I have some specific deficits that I'm working on. My hamstrings and everything below my knees. So gastrocs, calves, everything there is weak. So weakness wise, those are my weak points. I'm also experiencing some like sciatic nerve type referral stuff. So if you've never experienced this, nerves tend to have more of a sharp, burning, tingling presentation to them. And it's difficult for me to say where exactly that's coming from, but it starts either from my back or high up in my glute and goes down to my knees. I have a little bit of tightness and it's starting to go into my calf a little bit. And I get that pretty much, straight away. So it's how can I bulletproof my back as well as just work on my deficits so that I can just perform the best I can.
Yeah. So then after you're doing those weekend runs, does it usually take you quite a while to recover?
Yeah. So I want to talk about last week because last week was really tough.
Was this your 15 miles?
16.
16.
So from here till taper, I'm increasing 2 miles a week.
Okay.
On my long run. So yesterday was 18. The week previous was 16. And I got the same sensation, but I ran a different route. So yesterday I ran at White Rock, and White Rock, the loop is 9 miles. So I ran one way, refueled, ran the other way.
Right.
And
that's pretty flat too. There's not a lot of elevation.
That makes it easy.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the bathrooms. It just makes training easy. So when I ran last week, I ran Preston Ridge Trail, which runs from North Dallas to Plano.
Okay.
But I ran out of trail. So I needed to get 4 more miles before I turned around. And so I ran on the streets of Plano. And this is another thing that I can pull for our pain science discussion. My symptoms were way worse in Plano, dealing with cars and crosswalks and stopping. Like if I just had a straight up route where my body just gets in a rhythm, even though it hurts, you just keep moving.
Right. You're just at steady state the whole time.
It's not, am I going to get hit by a car kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I realized that my preparation for that stressful scenario wasn't as good. So my preparation was a lot better this time. And I already feel today way better in how I've recovered.
So what kind of techniques are you doing for recovery?
So I am doing everything I can.
Right. So foam rolling, lacrosse balls, rolling peanuts. I guess because you mentioned you had some back pain. Peanuts for the back. That's one of my favorites. Do you do any cryotherapy? Compression sleeves?
I haven't done cryo, but what I do try and engage in is cold showers.
Oh, okay.
So less from a like rehabilitation standpoint. I'm just cold adverse. Like I hate being cold.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I moved to Texas.
Why do you do cold showers? What's your main motivation for it? Is it the recovery? Is it the kind of biochemical benefits, the adrenaline release, dopamine release?
So 2 things. One, it's mentally hard for me to wake up every morning and say, at the end of the shower, I'm going to stand here and rinse myself for several times in cold water.
Right. So you're saying it's good for you to do hard things, so you're going to do them.
Yes.
All right.
So that's one piece. And then, yes, there's this metabolic type idea that we know if we expose it's sort of like exercise, it's a beneficial stressor. So if we stress our body with cold, heat, exercise, we know that we'll be stronger metabolically for it.
Yeah, yeah. So then how do you do it? You do a tub? I know you mentioned the last minute of your shower. How'd you progress into it? Where are you right now with it?
So what I've started is, I take my shower as normal with warm, hot, whatever. And then each week that I successfully do 7 days, I add 2 rinses. So I have like a routine where I get like every part of my body, underarms, head, neck, in between the legs, all of it. So that's one rinse.
All right. This is getting really nitty gritty, but do you stay on a certain portion of your body for an amount of time until you feel it get uncomfortably cold, or are you constantly moving so that you're constantly cooling off everything at an even rate? So I do the same thing in the shower.
It's more at an even rate.
Even rate. Okay. So yeah, usually when I'm ever at the gym, I get into the shower and I think to myself, it's probably good for me if I do a cold shower, and I'm not super uncomfortable right now. So let's grit down and do it. And I'll sit there, and what I do is, since the palms of your hands and the palms of your feet and under your eyes, according to Andrew Huberman, not Huberman, but Huberman introduced a study that someone else did, that they release the most heat. The heat transfer rate from these parts of your body is the highest. So if you're trying to cool off, expose body heat, lower your core temperature, then it's most efficient to do it from your hands. So I'll stand in the shower and I'll make sure that it's on my face, on my hands, and that my feet are elevated so I can get airflow, even though it's wet for convection. And I'll just stand there for a minute, and then I'll turn around to my back because it gives my back time to warm up, and then put my hands behind me and do the same thing. So I'll just rotate from like 1 minute to 1 minute to 1 minute. Okay. And it gets really rough.
And are you like supinated? You mean like you're standing on the outside of your feet?
Yeah. So sometimes I'll stand on my toes. Sometimes I'll go supinated, just whatever's comfortable. So I'm not stressed too much. I just try to count to 1,000 100 times in my head, and then switch sides and usually do 2 or 3 rotations. So it lasts about 4 or 5 minutes.
That sounds like a great routine. Maybe
Yeah.
I need to give it a shot.
Yeah, go for it, man. I guess swimming in the pool sometimes is like cold exposure too, especially when it gets really cool. And then before I was training for Alcatraz, we have, I guess the divers over there have a hot tub that's filled with cold water. It's just a big cold bath. It's usually around 55 degrees. So that's the first time that I've done full out routine cold exposure every single day, starting from 5 minutes, working myself up to 8 minutes to 12 minutes. And then I was doing 15 every day just to prepare for the race. But I was also noticing that from a recovery standpoint, it was outstanding. I mean, the next day you'd come in and you have very minimal soreness. Everything felt, I wouldn't say loose, but it wasn't tense. It wasn't super sore. So there's a lot to it.
Yeah, my buddy Chris Allen, he's over in England right now, and for his master's, he did a study on, what are the effects for athletes post cold exposure. And I think he found mainly if you are a daily trainer, you're going to see results just like you spoke to anecdotally, that you're going to be better able to recover quickly for the next day's training.
Yeah. So I've also heard the argument, and I know nothing about it, but that when you introduce these kind of recovery techniques, you're supplementing your body with tools that it's not usually used to in order to recover, and it kind of becomes adapted to it. So for example, if you're training every single day and you start doing cold exposure every single day, your body creates the expectation to see cold exposure, and it starts adapting to that. And then when a time comes or a period comes where you no longer have that cold exposure, it's going to be worse off than what your prior baseline was as recovering naturally without that tool. This is just a theory I've heard. I've never experimented with it. I don't know the science behind it, but do you know anything about it?
I haven't heard of that, but it certainly makes sense from a homeostatic perspective. Even if you introduce a stressor, and yes, it's a beneficial stressor, but if you take it away, at some point, your body has to reestablish homeostasis.
Yeah. So you think there's any benefit for just making things as natural as possible when it comes to recovery in like a longevity standpoint? Or do you think it's useful to introduce these tools routinely or frequently? I guess, how would you think about it in a longevity case?
I think you want to introduce it because at some point, we have sort of seasons here in Texas where it gets colder. Mm-hmm. From a perspective of, can I get dropped anywhere and be fine? There are lots colder places in this country than Texas. So I want to be able to function at that particular temperature. So from a longevity perspective, though, like you asked, I still think that, we're talking very nuanced details, but the metabolic gains that we get might be more advantageous than how we feel, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So let's flip the flip the coin a little bit from talking cold exposure to heat exposure. Do you do any sauna recovery techniques?
I have messed around with it. I like the dry sauna better.
Okay.
I think the moist sauna, it sort of feels better, I guess.
Mhm.
It's easier to, continue to do.
Yeah. So are you going in there as more of another discomfort type of therapy?
Yeah.
All right. Tell me more.
So I have a sauna at both the club gym. My cousin and I live on a golf course, so there's like a wet sauna. It's what it is in there. And it's not anywhere near as hot as my gym sauna. And my gym sauna is a dry sauna.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that better because it feels like you get more of a stimulus from it. Like if you haven't done it in a while, it will literally burn your nose.
Oh, yeah, I know the feeling.
So
the nose and like the tops of your ears, at least for me.
And sometimes even like just sensitive areas like the backs of your hands, like these are places where we have lots of sensory receptors.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, like if they haven't been used to the sensation, they're going to be like, holy crap, what are you doing to me?
Yeah. So what kind of benefits do you see from it? And then how do you throw it into your training protocol?
So I haven't been going quite as much to the gym sauna because I've just been doing rehab at work. But what I typically did was post-workout as I guess you could say like a loosening effect, relaxing the muscles, and then also our beneficial stressor idea.
I like it. Personally, I do about the same thing. I try to go every Saturday just as a recovery technique because I'm sure you're pretty well versed in the whole HGH theory that if you kind of create the crisis response that your core temperature is about to rise, your body just starts pumping HGH because it doesn't know how to respond. But yeah, I do that probably once every 2 weeks. And I think the coolest thing that I've learned about it is that if the morning of or the day before I'm playing something on the piano and I'm trying to learn something and I have a really good practice session and then I go to the sauna the same day and do that kind of heat exposure and then take a nap afterwards and play the piano again, it just feels like somebody downloaded information in my brain as if I was in the Matrix and it was just plugged in and it goes in there. So there's a super strong effect. I would highly recommend it to anybody who's just trying to get a reset, either mental or physical. 30 minutes in the sauna, 180 degrees. Stick it out.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Have you ever just tried to take a nap without the sauna?
Oh, yeah. It's also good.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you want to talk about that? Muscle memory and sleep and how they work together?
We can talk a little bit about muscle memory. So what you're getting at is motor learning.
Mm-hmm.
And motor learning is sort of this science that we don't know exactly how the brain works, but we have all of these different theories. And so going way back, we have like the reflex theory. So the reflexes work in an arc. You've seen this. You've gone to your doctor. They do the physical. They check all of your reflexes. So let's do the knee jerk because that one's a pretty visual one. You put a stimulus into your body. It goes to the spinal cord. The spinal cord has a synapse and thus an output, which is jerk your knee. Mm-hmm. So that's our baseline for how motor learning works. It's just hardwired. What we're at now is more of a task-specific type of learning. And this is from Shumway Cook, and the most recent like information comes from 2007. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty dated. So we might even have more information that's just not textbook level yet. But the task-specific approach is basically what we do clinically, right? We talked about squatting, we talked about sport-specific. And when patients come in and say, hey, I have trouble doing X, that is so easy. That makes my job so easy because then they have a very specific thing that they want to work on. Mm-hmm. And we can break it down to movement, break it down into a hip hinge or break it down into Well, your glutes aren't strong, so let's strengthen those. We can break it down as much as we need to. But what we know from the task perspective is that when you initiate a new movement, let's say you've never barbell squatted before, so that's our exercise.
Mm-hmm.
We want to do that first task in the same fashion, lots of reps, same environment. We want to do that because we're not very good. We're not very efficient yet. We've got to do it in a very sterile environment because our body is just learning how to even move one joint versus the other.
Right. And you just have to be so cognitively aware of so many different moving pieces because it's all foreign to you, right? It's like a process overload almost.
Absolutely. There is a process overload. We've got the environment. You have to sense what's going on first before you move.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to generate a plan from the brain to move. And then we have so many sensory cells in addition to that. So we get more sensory feedback at the end to help us kind of reevaluate.
Yeah.
So as we get a little better at the movement, we can start to increase the variability of things.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you squat with more weight. And these are our training variables. Maybe we squat with an unstable surface. Maybe we add a jump and then a squat. Mm-hmm. And then we want it to look as specific as the patient wants for whatever they're doing. But we start very sterile. We add variability as you get better and better and better and more efficient at that particular movement.
Right. So that kind of constant introduction of variance is what triggers the learning, is what you're saying.
Yes.
And then where does sleep come into play with it? Because you were asking me if I noticed that I learn better after I take a nap playing on the piano.
Well, anecdotally, that's what you said.
Yeah.
So obviously sleep helps us recover, and that's kind of really important for our memory response.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where our memory is stored. So,
right. I'm going to share with you my analogy that I like to use in terms of learning anything. And whether it's right or not, I have no idea. I guess to preface, I've read a few books and a few studies about how the brain works and the different regions and muscle memories and like myelin sheathing to improve the neural synapses and the rate that they can fire at. And the way that I've always found myself thinking about it is that learning anything and your brain and your body to learning it is like a desktop computer. So are you familiar with the internals, like the function of RAM and a CPU?
A little bit.
Yeah, so you have RAM, which is your readily available memory. Like a standard computer might have 8 gigabytes of RAM. So that means anything that you have open on your computer that's running some kind of process, whatever data it needs to run those processes is going to be used in that readily available memory, RAM. So it's just very quick, but as soon as you close that process, it's gone. And then you have your hard drive, which stores things indefinitely, right? So let's say you're doing something on the RAM, and then you type something up in Word, right? You make a document, and then you want to save it. Here, before you save it, it's on your RAM, and then you save it, it goes onto your hard drive. So the way I think about learning is that, let's use piano. If I'm playing the piano, I'm actively using however much RAM I have available. There's 8 gigabytes, 12 gigabytes. Everyone's probably different, right? And then when I go to sleep after I was playing everything using the RAM, it gets downloaded to my hard drive in the brain. So that the next day, when I go and play on the piano, my RAM has less load on it because part of that information is already saved in the hard drive and it can pull that. And then I have more RAM available to kind of notice other things. And then the more that you keep sleeping and practice and sleep and practice and sleep, it's like upgrading the hard drive. You go from a solid state hard drive where it's a disk spinning and it's really slow to like some kind of new Sony technology, M.2 is what they call it if you're really techie, that it can shoot the information much faster. You can file transfer much faster, which would be analogous to the myelin sheathing, right? Because then you can fire neural connections faster. So I think like the key of learning is whenever you're doing something that's the variance you mentioned, introducing new weight, new balance, new environment, that requires more RAM. And the closer you get to reaching that RAM capacity, when you have good sleep, the better it downloads it to the hard drive. And then the more you learn. But you constantly have to balance them out so you're not overloading it and you're not doing something that doesn't require any variance in order so that the hard drive keeps functioning better. So that's kind of how I always thought about learning. But I've never really spoken about it to anybody who actually knows what's going on in the brain. So I'm curious what you have to think about it.
I think that's a great analogy. I think it's what you're kind of touching on is short-term memory, which is like your working memory, your RAM, and your long-term memory, which is your hard drive, your stuff that you don't really forget. I think that's a great analogy, though.
You know any neuroscientists? We'll have to bring them in.
We'll have to bring them in.
Yeah.
That is a bit above my pay grade.
Yeah, I want like a textbook in your hippocampus. This is what's happening on the neuron level, and you're wrong. But anyways, let's swing into diet.
Sure.
I guess most interesting to me, I know on your YouTube channel, you have a 20-something day series that you were vlogging your experience with Carnivore. What's the whole story behind it? What was your motivation?
Yeah. So we'll talk about Carnivore, and then I'll talk about just my journeyman experience, because this has started way long ago, like almost a decade ago. So I was just trying to find an optimized way to make my diet easy, repeatable, and ultimately improve my performance. So my life coach introduced me to the carnivore diet. I read Carnivore MD's book, Paul Salito's, I forget what it's called. But anyways, he goes on how to, the benefits and how to perform this diet. So I was like, all right, I've read enough of this. Let's just give it a shot. I'm young. I'll be able to recover from whatever damage, if any. So that's what is on my YouTube channel. I did a kind of a vlog series of like, how did I feel? What did I notice day to day? And kind of like the brass tacks of it all was it didn't produce the results that I wanted. I wanted to improve my testosterone, improve my performance, and those things didn't happen.
Gotcha. Were you getting blood work done as well?
So I did my lipid panel pre and post, and I had my BOD-POD body fat percentage pre, but I didn't have an opportunity to do it post. I was participating in some research with one of our colleagues, but I couldn't get in for a second. But I do know that I gained about 10 pounds, whether that's good or bad, body fat percentage wise. All I have is pictures to go on. So, certainly gained some muscle, some of it is definitely fat as well. My lipid panels obviously were more in the problematic ranges. My HDL LDL ratio remained about the same, but everything else increased. Triglycerides, LDL, HDL, obviously, all of that increased into like the cardiovascular risk factor range. Now, that's not necessarily, hey, I'm going to have a heart attack next week, but we start building these risk factors. Sedentary lifestyle, smoking, alcohol, these blood markers. Then you start looking at the patient as a whole, like, well, if we fix some of these, you would have less likely to have a stroke or a heart attack.
Right. And then were you doing all of this in a period where your training was relatively consistently?
Yeah. So I was doing my rehab workouts. And
you didn't change anything there during that time?
So you can see that even just body weight bands, some lighter weights, you can still build muscle if you're giving the body appropriate amounts of nutrients.
Yeah. It's just that the overall function might not be as clean as a alternative, more balanced, relatively speaking, diet.
Absolutely. And so for the viewers, I was eating mainly ground beef, and I made a few tweaks throughout based on ability to do my job more so than anything. Because it's a pretty drastic change from switching, your fuel from carbs to fat.
Mhm.
So pretty much ground beef cost me about $150 in groceries a week.
All right. Were you going kind of an all organic grass-fed route or just a mixture of whatever?
So I definitely did try to make it a high quality source. Initially, I went to Walmart and did their highest quality. I think it was 80-20, so that I had enough calories.
Yeah.
I'm only eating meat.
I mean, if you're carnivore, right, and you're reducing carbs, you need to have the extra fat.
Absolutely. So that's what I did at the beginning. And then I found a farmer, because that's the best thing to do, right? You get it right from the source. So I bought like a month's worth of ground beef to get me through. And it was really good stuff. Got to tell you, like, we're in Texas, might as well take advantage of
I might ask
good ground.
you for his contact after this.
I'll let you know. So that was how I kind of put on the carnivore diet. Now, I mentioned that I had to make some tweaks. I needed a little bit of sugar just to get my start. So I added honey at about 2 weeks to each meal. So I would literally put honey on my ground beef. Was pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I don't doubt it wouldn't be. I mean, like, you can hardly even go to the grocery store nowadays and get bacon that's not, honey applewood smoked, or get a pack of beef jerky that doesn't have added sugar to it. There's so many brown sugar pork chop recipes, so honey on ground beef doesn't sound completely out of this world.
Yeah, so that's a great.
Anyways, continue.
So that's pretty much how I did carnivore. I had some eggs for our cholesterol, so that it continue, the testosterone and all that. Overall, it just wasn't the diet for me. So in closing about carnivore, if you're trying to optimize your diet, you just have to try it. How, track everything that's important to you, your blood markers, your performance in the gym or in your sport, how you perform at work, like all of these things. You just need to be a little scientific with it about what is it that I care about? How does it change as I change this big part of my life?
What is your diet these days? What have you found works best for you? So you can go into also that whole 10-year journey that you spoke.
So let's start with the journey, and then I'll bring us up to speed of where I'm at now.
Perfect.
In senior year of undergrad, I lived alone, so I had a lot of time I cooked a lot. And that's where I first started to experiment with things. I had a viral disease, unfortunately, at that point, and was noticing whenever I would have a big bowl of pasta or a lot of bread in a sandwich form, I would just feel awful the next day. Cloudy mentally, changes in my bowels, and just like overall, just not feeling good. And I began to notice that it was caused by the gluten. So what I did was, very dramatically, I threw away both my flour bags and my sugar bags. So those were no longer a part of how I cooked, how I did things. And I noticed that it was really hard to do that. Like, you think about the supermarket, you now have the produce section, you now have maybe like 2 rows in the grocery store, and then the meat, dairy, basically the perimeter in 2 rows. Everything else pretty much contains gluten. So after taking that out and kind of doing some problem solving, I ate a lot of rice, some corn products like tortillas and stuff like that. I noticed that I just felt better. And up to speed now, I still eat probably more protein than is recommended from our studies, but I'm also trying to improve my lean mass. So that's my point for that. I do still eat a lot of rice, vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, greens, but I'll mix those along with my proteins, utilizing the good fats that the meat has to make them taste better, basically. So I would say I'm still animal based, but I'm not carnivore at this point.
Right. So would you say you're kind of a hybrid in between a paleo and Mediterranean type of diet?
That sounds pretty accurate.
What are the biggest benefits you see out of that, besides kind of the symptoms you're having with the gluten intolerance?
So mainly it's like recovery for not necessarily just exercise,
Mhm.
but with our work, dealing with people, mentally taxing work.
Oh yeah.
So recovering from all sorts of angles, I think it fuels sort of like this radical lifestyle that I want to lead.
Is that a big thing that you talk to your patients about too? Is kind of fixing their diets in order to help them fix the issues that they're having that they come to see you for? I mean, I imagine a lot of it has to do with inflammation, and I guess inflammation is just such a big one where diet has a huge role in it.
It's one of those things that I can touch on, but most of the time I talk to people about sleep,
Mhm.
about stress, about other things, because they're just not ready for that conversation.
Yeah.
They're not to that optimization point. And some of them may never be.
Yeah.
You just have to meet the person where they are.
What do you think about caffeine, coffee, tea? Where does this sit in your diet, in your lifestyle plan?
I think most of our substances we should taper on and taper off of in order to not have any tolerance problems.
Mhm.
So I enjoy a good cup of coffee. I had one this morning. But I also don't want to become dependent on it. So in my training, I was using a lot of caffeine to get through my runs.
Mhm.
And I also did that in the morning. So ideal times and amounts for me is like 1 to 2 cups in the morning, early in the morning,
Mhm.
because I'm really sensitive to it. So it'll mess up my sleep.
Oh, you and I both. Yeah. I don't drink coffee after about 11 a.m. I could probably still fall asleep. I just noticed that my sleep quality suffers dramatically. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's like 18 hours. You know, they say the half-life is 6 hours, 18 hours,
Right.
or I'm not sleeping. So that's where I'm at personally. I think that we should take at least a week
Mhm.
and kind of, I do it cold turkey, but just no caffeine to allow our adrenal glands just to reset.
Yeah. How do you feel when you start drinking it again at the end of that reset period?
Oh, great.
It hits you like a truck, doesn't it?
It's fantastic.
Yeah, I do it before all my swim competitions. The week before, I'll just completely cold turkey, just like you. And then 1 or 2 days before the meet, I'll just go with 1 or 2 cups before waking up in the morning, and it's go time.
Yeah, I love it. No, it just feels like, oh, this is the first cup of coffee I've ever had again.
Yeah.
One thing I do though is I use not my favorite, but we have a Keurig.
Mhm.
So I have the plastic cup that you can refill.
Mhm.
So I can like kind of build myself up to the point where I'm having 2 cups of like the thing full.
Mhm.
And that's when I know, okay, it's time. We need to take a break.
Right.
Whereas like when I first start, I'll do like half of it. Like the plastic Keurig cup filled only halfway. And then, you know, slowly you gain a tolerance. So I'll add more and more based on how I feel.
Yeah. How about supplements? Is there anything that you rely on pretty regularly? A big vitamin guy, creatine after your workouts for recovery, pre-workouts to get you amped up? What camp do you sit in?
So I'm not a pre-workout guy, as we talked about.
Mhm.
That would really mess up my sleep. When it comes to supplements, I'm more in the camp of, I mean, based on my training, I'll take different things, but you should optimize your diet first.
Mhm.
That's something you do every day. And if that's not in a good spot, then what's adding one supplement here, one supplement there?
Right.
You know, biggest bang for your buck, start with your diet.
Right. So you're saying supplements are more of a Band-Aid.
I think they're more of like an optimization piece.
Okay.
So based on, I mean, sometimes people have a particular diet because of just a disease that they have or
Mhm.
whatever it may be. I think start there and optimize that. And then as we look into supplements, they should be the exception, not the rule.
Okay.
For as, getting your macros and things of that nature. Right now, I am putting minerals in my water, trace mineral supplement. I have one at work and one at home, and it says amount of drops. I just squeeze it, and that's good enough for me. The purpose of that being when we have our water, most of the time it's purified. So that takes everything good and everything bad out.
Mhm.
So that's why I add the minerals back in. Now I'm also taking a joint supplement because I'm just putting a lot of mileage on my joints. It's a chondroitin, MSM, and one other thing. It's a common one that you get the three.
Okay. Is this similar to like a collagen supplement or completely different?
It's different.
Okay.
So these are three things. Oh, I think maybe hyaluronic acid is in there.
Okay.
So the three. But those have been shown to improve recovery of like our joint structures.
Mhm.
So I'm doing that right now. I'll stop it once I'm done with my marathon.
Right. So just very strictly an as needed basis.
So that's what I try to do with my supplements. Now I do take D daily.
Mhm.
I'll take more in the winter. I'm inside all the time with work. So I don't, and unless on the weekends, I don't really get a lot of sun exposure.
Mhm.
So I do my D, and then I'm also taking a vitamin C, an ester C. So ester C compared to a just ascorbic acid form stays in your body.
Okay.
It's a little more time release.
Gotcha. So it's not at risk of just passing through your kidneys and excreted out in the bathroom.
Mhm.
Is there any extra benefit to that other than just getting more for what you put into your body since it's slower release? It kind of gives your body more time to absorb it effectively as needed.
That's the main thing, is just so it's actually utilized. Yeah.
All right. Well, so we talked about a lot of health and lifestyle things: recovery, cold exposure, heat exposure, diet, training, supplements. Is there anything else that you do that defines a healthy lifestyle that you think is super important?
Yeah. I think branching out more so into like our mindfulness, meditation, prayer, even I'll throw that in there. I think those are super important to connect and just be well-rounded. I think far too often we fall into the trap of staring at our phones when we could be checking in a little bit more, and maybe we would find or sense that something is wrong that maybe we need to address, whether it's mentally or just you can take cues from where you're at in terms of like, am I doing the right job?
Mhm.
Am I fulfilled or happy or whatever is going on? I think if we just didn't have so much distraction,
Mhm.
that we would find like we're healthier as a whole.
Right. So, what practices do you do to kind of tune into that? Meditation, yoga, both?
So my rehab kind of works a little bit of yoga in. I have a video on using our intuition to drive what our exercise looks like.
Mhm.
So when I'm not training and just trying to keep the boat afloat for my long runs, I'm using sensation to drive what exercise I do. If I feel tight in an area, if I feel discomfort in an area, I'm going to spend some time there, spend some, exercise through that.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I do meditate in the morning. I think this is a good way for me to start my day. However I'm feeling, it's good to check in and say, first be aware, and then can I take a step in the right direction of trying to address that?
Mhm.
Right now, I am like actually speaking out loud so that I'm getting more comfortable literally guiding someone through a meditation that I might do.
Oh, okay. We kind of just baby steps into that realm. you notice any differences about your perception of what's going on through your meditation when you change that element from an internal to an external dialogue?
It's less about me, it's more like how are my, like when I'm refining, it's less about did I get something good out of that for myself?
Mm-hmm.
It's did I lead well enough that the person had a good experience from my meditation.
Gotcha. So is that something you're going to be tying into your PT practice as well?
Sometimes we certainly, need, more often I will do what's called progressive gradual motor relaxation. Mm-hmm. Whereas you like start top down and you like squeeze the muscles of your face and all the way down. When somebody's really ramped up and their nervous system is really sensitive, they need a way to just get that out of your system.
Yeah.
But I am doing some more like wellness type things with my business. Mm-hmm. So that is something that I might utilize in that practice.
Very cool. So you mentioned your business. What do you have going on in that space? And your YouTube channel as well.
Yeah. So YouTube channel is, we always want to try and create more than we consume. And I consume a lot of YouTube. So
you and I both.
I think it's the best medium to get good information from and have it be a little interactive as well. So I'm creating like sort of like a holistic type approach to all the things we've talked about, diet, exercise, mental wellness, spiritual wellness, mm-hmm. all of those things. And just sort of addressing that with my flair. Now, in my business, starting with top tier, like coaching. Mm-hmm. So, a coaching client, we would look at the whole gamut of things. And what is it that we need to optimize first and then move on to the next thing and next thing. So you can think of me as like an optimization coach. I want to work with people who have been in this space. They've tried some things on their own, but maybe they haven't found quite the exposure, quite the thing that is going to help them reach their goals.
Right.
So that's top tier. And then other tiers down below are just, do you want a customized nutrition program or customized diet or a customized exercise program? And then under that, more of generic plans for people who are just starting out.
Very cool. I think you have the right knack of it too, just from your own personal experience with your experimentation. And on top of that, everything you do professionally, certainly the go-to guy for that.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I think that you're right. There is, with my own experiment, being a journeyman of life.
Yeah.
There's lots of anecdotes, but there's.
Do you have any kind of projects that you're working on that haven't been released yet that you're excited to kind of bring forward soon, or is that kind of hush hush under the table?
No, it's okay. We can talk about it. I'm filming some new content about the nervous system. Okay. And more like the peripheral nervous system and how we can interact with that in our exercise.
Oh, excellent. Well, everybody heard it. We're going to have to point links to your YouTube channels and all your social media so they can get it once it releases.
Yeah, I've got them right here if you want me to shout them out.
Go for it. I mean, I'm also going to throw them on screen too.
That works.
And the description everywhere.
Well, my YouTube is at Nicholas Pippert, and that's a K instead of an H. And then if you have any questions for me, go ahead and shoot me an email at nicholas.pippert@gmail.com.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to ask you one more question before we close out. It's one I like to end all of these with. So if you're in my shoes, kind of guiding the conversation, loosely steering it, what's one question or topic you would bring up that I haven't?
That's a tough question.
Usually stumps a lot of people. Or some people are really quick to answer as well. I love it as like an interview or two because it gives me a laundry list of like really good questions to ask in the future.
I like this question because I see a lot of, we talked about this, the young athlete, mm-hmm. and it would be, if you had an ability to give yourself X amount of years previously some advice, what would it be? I think that would be a really good question to pose for your.
All right, so let's answer it.
I think it would be to do more research on your own about what it is that you need to be doing. I fell into the trap of just exercising the way that I was taught or doing the nutrition the way that my parents did. And simply because that's the way that we did it, I accepted it as fact and how I needed to do things. So if I were to give myself some advice, it would be to be bold and use your own approach earlier.
Right. Just ask those questions, ask why, and do your homework to figure it out.
Be a little more curious.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant advice, especially today too, when you have resources like YouTube or just everybody's willing to share information as well. Now more than ever, you can get solid information, especially about the body and how to perform and optimize things.
The information is out there. You just have to go and consume it.
Absolutely. Well, all right, Nick. Thanks for coming on, man. You've been most excellent.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate you doing this for me.
Oh, you got it. Cheers.
Cheers.
And that's a wrap. Well, thank you very much for listening through the podcast. If you're enjoying it, please visit the Patreon page that I've linked in the description. Contributing over there is a great way to show me that you're getting some value out of it and that you also want to see it grow. So with that, thank you once again for listening. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next podcast. Cheers.